For billions of people around the world, the Virgin Mary is much more than a symbol of the Christian faith. She is considered the mother of humanity, the merciful intercessor between heaven and earth. Throughout history, she has appeared to ordinary people at unexpected moments, bringing messages of peace, warning, and consolation. Whenever something big was about to happen, a war, an epidemic, collective suffering, many believers have reported feeling her presence beforehand as a warning from heaven, not with words, but with an inexplicable sensation, a deep peace, a clarity of heart, a call to courage. It is as if she prepared the chosen hearts to face trials that would require greater strength than human strength. Scholars of Marian spirituality affirm that the Virgin has a special predilection for the suffering, the marginalized, those who carry multiple crosses. She appeared to Bernadette in Lourdes, a poor and sick girl. She manifested herself to Juan Diego, a simple indigenous man in Guadalupe. And over the centuries, it has continued to touch the lives of people who, in the eyes of the world, seemed insignificant, but who carried within themselves a special mission. That was exactly what Jonathan Joss felt weeks before his tragic death. In silence, without witnesses, in a small Marian temple on the outskirts of San Antonio, he knelt and prayed. And there, amidst flickering candles and the soft scent of roses that inexplicably emanated from the altar, he felt that something greater than himself was about to happen. An invisible force touched him, like maternal hands on his head. Jonathan left that place in peace, but with the strange feeling that he needed to be ready for what he did not yet know. But his indigenous heart, accustomed to sacred mysteries, understood that it was a call from above. Jonathan Joss was born on December 22, 1965, in San Antonio, Texas, during one of the heaviest snowstorms the region had ever seen. His maternal grandmother, a Comanche healer named Maria Bright Star, said that the boy had arrived accompanied by the spirits of his ancestors, because being born during a storm was a sign that great challenges and great victories awaited him. He was a descendant of the Comanche and Apache indigenous peoples, two warrior tribes known for their courage and resilience. From a young age, he faced the challenge of being a person who carried within himself multiple identities: indigenous, artistic, gay, and spiritual, in an environment that was often hostile to his existence. In Texas in the 1970s and 1980s, being different was not only difficult, it was dangerous. But it was precisely this complexity that shaped the man he became, deep, sensitive, and passionate about art and justice. His mother, Linda Running Bear, used to say, "Jonathan didn't come to hide. He came to show that it is possible to be all that you are, with pride and dignity." As a teenager, Jonathan faced constant bullying at school. He was too tall, too different, too sensitive for the rigid standards of rural Texas. But he found refuge in the dramatic arts and traditional music of his people. At the age of 16, he had already mastered the native flute and the sacred tambourine, instruments he learned from his paternal grandfather, an Apache shaman named Healing Wind. He studied theater and speech at Our Lady of the Lake University, a Catholic university where, paradoxically, he found acceptance and support. His teachers recognized his unique talent and his ability to bring characters to life with a rare authenticity. It was also there that Jonathan deepened his Christian spirituality, without ever abandoning the ancestral traditions of his people. "For me, there is no contradiction between Christ and the spirits of my ancestors," he once said in an interview. "They both teach me about love, sacrifice, and the importance of protecting the most vulnerable." He began his career in the film in 1993, starting with small roles in independent productions. His striking face and, above all, his deep, melodious voice quickly caught the attention of casting directors. But Jonathan was selective. He did not accept roles that stereotyped indigenous people or portrayed them in a disrespectful manner. He became nationally famous when he voiced John Redcorn in the animated series King of the Hill. The character, an indigenous masseur with a complex history, allowed Jonathan to bring nuance and dignity to a role that could have been purely comedic. His performance was full of subtlety, intelligent humor, and, in the most emotional scenes, a melancholy that touched the hearts of viewers. Later, he played Chief Ken Hotate in Parks and Recreation, where his performance masterfully balanced humor, social criticism, and cultural authenticity. His lines as the tribal chief became iconic, especially when he said, with a mischievous smile, "We pretend not to understand English when it suits us." But his art was never just entertainment. For Jonathan, each role was an opportunity to represent his people, their history, and their values. It was a form of cultural resistance, a way to show that Native people were not relics of the past, but a living, breathing part of contemporary America. Off-screen, Jonathan was a man with a passion for animals, music, and spirituality. He led a band called the Red Corn Band, which blended traditional Native sounds with contemporary influences. He was often seen at festivals and powwows playing Native American instruments, making soulful music to heal, to move, and to remember his heritage. His home in San Antonio was a sanctuary for both rescued animals and Native youth seeking guidance. Jonathan maintained a small studio where he taught traditional music and offered free mentoring to young Native actors. "If I can make it this far," he would say, "it's my duty to reach out to those who come after me." He owned 7 rescue dogs, each with a story of abandonment or abuse. Thunderheart, Kokopelli, Ayana, Stormcaller, Sacred Fire, Morning. Star and Little Warrior were more than just pets. They were his furry family. Jonathan believed the dogs were spirit guides sent to protect him and teach him about unconditional love. However, his personal life was also marked by significant struggles. Jonathan was married to Tristan Caron de Gonzalez, an educator and human rights activist whom he met in 2018 at a conference on cultural preservation. The meeting was described by both as an instant connection of souls. Tristan, who is of Mexican and German descent, shared Jonathan's passion for social justice and preserving cultural traditions. Together, they were a couple who radiated love, mutual respect, and commitment to causes greater than themselves. Their wedding ceremony, held in 2020 amid the pandemic, was an intimate celebration that blended indigenous, Catholic, and Mexican traditions. The couple exchanged vows under a sacred tree on Jonathan's family property, with only close family members in attendance. The tribe's shaman blessed the union with a sage purification ceremony, while a Catholic priest celebrated the Christian vows. But the couple faced constant threats and persecution from intolerant neighbors. The area where they lived, although peaceful at first glance, hid a toxic environment of prejudice that intensified after their marriage became public through a report in a local newspaper. Verbal attacks were frequent. Offensive graffiti appeared regularly on their property. Disapproving looks were constant whenever they went out together, and the complicit silence of much of the neighborhood fueled a violence that grew silently, like a storm gathering on the horizon. In December 2024, the attacks intensified. Anonymous letters with death threats began to arrive. Their car tires were repeatedly slashed, and one night they found one of their dogs injured in the yard, apparently poisoned. Miraculously, Stormcaller survived, but the incident deeply affected the couple. It was at this time that Jonathan began attending a small chapel dedicated to the Virgin of Guadalupe, located a few miles from his home. The temple, built in the 1940s by Mexican immigrants, was a simple but deeply spiritual place. The walls were decorated with ex-votos and photographs of faithful who had received graces. Jonathan went alone, always in the late afternoon, when the golden light of the Texan sun created an almost mystical atmosphere inside the chapel. He would kneel before the image of the Virgin and spend long minutes simply breathing, in communion with something greater. He did not ask for protection for himself, but for peace for the world and wisdom to deal with hatred without becoming contaminated by it. Dona Rosa Martinez, the chapel's caretaker, remembered him well. He was a very polite man, very respectful. He would always light a candle for Our Lady and sit there quietly, praying. Sometimes I saw tears in his eyes, but I also saw a great peace, as if he knew something that we didn't. In May 2025, something changed in Jonathan's prayers. Once, as he was leaving the chapel, he confided to his friend and spiritual mentor, Father Miguel Hernandez. I felt something there, as if she were with me, as if she was preparing me for something great. He couldn't explain it better, but his eyes shone with a mixture of peace and determination that impressed the priest. Jonathan had always been a spiritual man, Father Miguel recalls. But in those last days there was something different about him. A serenity that only comes when one is in complete harmony with God's will. Tristan noticed the change too. He was more affectionate, more present, she recalls. It was as if every moment together was too precious to waste. He kept telling me that he loved me, that I was the greatest gift life had ever given him. Jonathan began organizing his belongings, updating documents, and recording video messages for young indigenous people. If anything happens to me, he told Tristan, I want them to know that one life lived with purpose is worth more than 1,000 lives wasted in mediocrity. In January 2025, this pent-up tension exploded in tragedy. Jonathan and Tristan's home burned down in the early hours of a Sunday morning. The fire, which investigators later confirmed was arson, consumed everything in a matter of hours. They lost clothes, documents, irreplaceable musical instruments, family photos, and lifelong memories. But worst of all was the loss of 3 of his beloved dogs. Cocopelli, Sacred Fire, and Morning Star died in the flames, trapped in a room that the fire reached before they could be rescued. Jonathan's grief was indescribable. These animals were more than companions. They were family, a source of unconditional joy in an often hostile world. It was more than a material attack. It was a direct blow to the hearts of 2 people who only wanted to live in peace, love without restrictions, and contribute positively to their community. After the fire, the pain was immense, but Jonathan did not give in to hatred. On the contrary, instead of isolating himself, he sought even greater solace in prayer. His visits to the chapel became daily. He spent hours on his knees talking to the Virgin as if he were talking to his own mother. Most Holy Mother, he whispered, do not let anger take over my heart. Give me the strength to forgive, to continue loving, to be an example that good always triumphs over evil. On May 30th, 2025, Jonathan had his most intense experience in the chapel. He arrived at dusk, as always, but this time something was different. The image of the Virgin seemed to radiate a light of its own, and the scent of roses was so intense that it was tangible. Jonathan knelt down and for the first time in months felt absolute peace. It was as if all fears, all anguish, all pain had been washed from his soul. Then he heard a soft, maternal voice that seemed to come from within his own heart. My dear son, your mission on earth is almost complete. You have lived courageously, loved without restraint, and never lost faith, even in the most difficult moments. Soon you will be called home, but do not be afraid. I will be with you, and your sacrifice will not be in vain. It will be the seed of change for many hearts. Jonathan remained silent for almost 2 hours. When he finally stood up, his eyes were serene but determined. He lit a special candle, kissed the hand of the image of the Virgin, and whispered, Thy will be done, Mother. Dona Rosa, who was watching discreetly, said later, I have never seen anyone leave here with such peace on their face. It was as if he had received a very special blessing. On June 1st, 2025, exactly 2 days after their last mystical experience, Jonathan and Tristan returned to the place where their house had once stood. They went to collect mail that had been redirected to that address and to try to recover any objects that had survived the fire. The property was unrecognizable. Where there had once been a home full of life, music and love, now only ashes, twisted iron and charred memories remained. Amid the rubble, they found the remains of the bodies of their 3 dogs. The silence of that place weighed like a tombstone on their souls. It was as if time had stopped at that tragic moment in January. Jonathan knelt beside the remains of Sacred Fire, his oldest dog, and said a prayer in the Comanche language, asking that the spirits of his companions find peace in the world of their ancestors. Tristan watched, moved by the dignity and spiritual strength his husband displayed even in the midst of so much pain. But the real tragedy was yet to come. As they sifted through the wreckage in search of anything that could be salvaged, they were surprised by Sigfredo Alvarez Cheja, a 47-year-old neighbor known for his extremist views and public homophobic comments. He was one of the men who had shown hostility in the past, especially after local news reports about Jonathan and Tristan's wedding. According to Tristan's testimony, Seja approached them visibly upset, shouting homophobic and racial slurs. The words were violent, filled with a hatred that seemed to have been building for months. The man's gaze was distraught, as if fueled by an irrational rage that had finally found its opportunity to manifest. "You have no right to be here," Seja shouted. "This is a neighborhood of good people, of families, not a place for your perversions." Jonathan tried to calm the situation. In his deep, calm voice, he said, "Sir, we just came to get our mail. We don't want any trouble with anyone. We'll leave as soon as we're done." But Seja was beyond reason. He continued with the insults, increasingly aggressive, increasingly closer. It was then that he pulled out a gun, a .38 caliber revolver, and pointed it directly at the couple. "You have ruined this neighborhood," he shouted. "You have brought shame to our families. Today, this ends." What happened next was an act of love that defined not only Jonathan's last seconds of life, but the very essence of who he was as a human being. In an instant impulse, driven by a love greater than the fear of death, Jonathan stepped in front of Tristan. Without hesitation, without thinking about the consequences, he used his own body as a human shield. It was the same love that had guided his entire life, the love that made him protect abandoned animals, that led him to mentor lost youth, that drove him to use his art to give voice to the voiceless. "No!" he shouted, extending his arms to shield his husband completely. "If you want to shoot someone, shoot me. He has nothing to do with this." The shots came fast, 3 consecutive shots that echoed across the silent property. Jonathan was hit in the chest and abdomen. He fell immediately, but his last conscious gesture was to hold Tristan's hand and whisper, "I love you. Don't hate me. Forgive me for my sake." Tristan, miraculously, survived without physical injuries, protected by her husband's body until the last moment. The police arrived quickly, alerted by the gunshots and an anonymous call. Seja was arrested at the scene, with the gun in his hand, apparently in a state of shock over what he had done. During the interrogation, he confessed to the crime, but claimed self-defense of public morality, a justification that outraged even experienced investigators. However, even with the clear evidence, the documented history of persecution in Tristan's testimony, the case was initially not classified as a hate crime by local authorities. The justice system's failure to act provoked outrage not only among friends and family, but among activists, artists, and public figures across the country. Cynthia Nixon, actress and activist for LGBTQ+ rights, published a long text on her social media that went viral within hours. Jonathan Joss was more than a talented actor. He was a man of integrity, a committed artist, a tireless activist, and a loving human being. He died because he loved. He died because he refused to hide. He died because he chose to protect those he loved instead of protecting himself. We cannot normalize hate. We cannot accept that love is punished with death. Justice for Jonathan. Jonathan Joss's death caused a wave of emotion that crossed national borders. Media outlets from all over the world told his story, remembered his iconic characters, his ancestral music, his tireless activism. But most of all, they remembered his courage, the courage to be authentic in a world that punished authenticity, the courage to love in an environment that criminalized love, the courage to sacrifice his own life to save the one he loved. In the following days, hundreds of tributes appeared spontaneously. Fans of King of the Hill shared compilations of John Redcorn's best lines on social media. Indigenous communities across the Americas held traditional ceremonies in his memory. LGBTQ+ activists organized vigils in dozens of cities carrying candles and posters with his smiling photo. His image was painted on murals in Los Angeles, New York, San Antonio, and Mexico City. In all of them, Jonathan appeared surrounded by dogs, holding a flute Native American woman, with the Virgin of Guadalupe in the background, a visual representation of all that he had been, an artist, an indigenous person, a protector of the vulnerable, and a man of faith. Tristan, devastated but determined to honor his husband's memory, announced the creation of the Jonathan Joss Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of hate crimes and empowering marginalized indigenous communities. In his opening speech, tearful but firm, he said, "Jonathan taught me that love is the most revolutionary act there is. He taught me that being different is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be proud of. He taught me that protecting those we love sometimes requires the greatest sacrifice a human being can make. Now, I will honor those teachings every day of my life by helping others who face the same hate that tried to destroy us." The foundation quickly garnered support from artists, activists, and human rights organizations. Matt Groening, creator of King of the Hill, announced that all future royalties from the character John Redcorn would be donated to the foundation. The final episode of the series was dedicated to Jonathan's memory, with a moving tribute, showing John Redcorn teaching indigenous children to play the traditional flute. And that small Marian chapel, where Jonathan silently sought strength in the last months of his life, began to receive visits from strangers from all over the world. People who, even without knowing him personally, felt that there was something special there. Perhaps the energy of a good man, perhaps the invisible embrace of the Virgin who had prepared him for his destiny. Mrs. Rosa Martinez, now 78, has become the unofficial guardian of Jonathan's memory. She always keeps a special candle lit before the image of the Virgin and tells all visitors about that holy man who came here to talk to Our Lady. He knew, she says, with the wisdom of someone who has lived a lot and seen a lot. In the last few days, he knew something was going to happen, but he wasn't afraid. He had peace, because he knew he wasn't alone. For many believers, Mary's presence before the tragedy was a heavenly warning, a spiritual preparation for what was to come. For others, it was an early comfort, the assurance that Jonathan would not face his fate alone. For Tristan, it was confirmation that her husband had been chosen for a greater mission, a mission that was completed the moment he chose love over fear, sacrifice over flight. 6 months after the tragedy, Sigfredo Alvarez Ceja was finally convicted of aggravated murder as a hate crime after an intense campaign by civil rights organizations and international media pressure. During the trial, evidence of a systematic pattern of harassment and threats was presented, including audio recordings in which Ceja expressed violent intentions against the couple. Surprisingly, during his final statement, Ceja demonstrated genuine remorse. "I was filled with hate," he said, breaking down in tears. "A hatred that was not mine, that was planted in me by others, but that I chose to feed. Jonathan Joss was a better man than I will ever be. He died protecting those he loved, while I killed out of hatred. I cannot undo what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for the harm I caused." Ceja was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But his personal transformation during his imprisonment became one of the most unexpected aspects of the entire story. He began to study, to read about tolerance and human rights, and eventually became an advocate for LGBTQ+ rights within the prison system. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of this entire tragedy was its transformative impact on the community that had been the scene of so much prejudice. Jonathan's death not only shocked, but awakened dormant consciences. Neighbors who had remained silent in the face of the attacks began to speak out, to apologize, to acknowledge their complicit inaction. The local church, which had maintained an ambiguous stance on LGBTQ+ rights, began offering seminars on Christian acceptance and love. Area schools have added anti-bullying and cultural diversity programs. The mayor of San Antonio declared June 1st Jonathan Joss Memorial Day and instituted annual awards for local activists who promote tolerance and inclusion. The property where the burned house once stood has been transformed into a memorial park, with a special garden dedicated to the 3 dogs who died in the blaze. For Tristan, who now lives in a small house near the chapel where Jonathan worshipped, his husband's presence remains a daily reality. "I feel him," he says, simply, "especially when I go to chapel, but also at home, when I'm working, at the foundation, when I'm helping someone who's going through what we've been through. It's like he's guiding me, giving me the strength to keep going." The 4 dogs who survived, Thunderheart, Ayana, Stormcaller, and Little Warrior, continue to live with Tristan. Neighbors often report seeing them standing in formation at the old site of the house, as if they were standing guard or waiting for someone who will never return. Jonathan Joss lives on, in the memory of those who loved him, in the struggle of those who seek justice, in the art he left forever etched in the history of American television, in the music that still echoes at powwows and Native American festivals, in the courage of all those who, like him, choose love, even when the world insists on intolerance. He lives on in the foundation that bears his name and that has helped hundreds of victims of hate crimes. He lives on in the Native American youth who found in his story inspiration to pursue their artistic dreams. It lives in each person who, upon learning about his story, decides to be a little braver, a little more loving, a little more willing to protect the vulnerable. And perhaps above all, he lives under the serene gaze of the Virgin Mary, the one who prepared him spiritually for his destiny, who accompanied him in his final moments and who now welcomes him into her eternal maternal embrace. Because the Virgin Mary is always there, especially when no one else is, especially when love must triumph over hate, especially when someone must find the courage to do the right thing, even if it costs everything. Jonathan Joss's story is proof that true love is indestructible, that genuine courage is contagious, and that some people are born not to live long lives, but to live lives that transform the world forever. And somewhere, in a small chapel in Texas, a candle continues to burn, a rose exudes its inexplicable scent, and the maternal presence of the Virgin continues to comfort broken hearts and inspire acts of heroic love. Because some endings are actually eternal beginnings.